Rochelle, welcome to Safe
Hello.
Haven Podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so honored to have you as a guest here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So, first and foremost, please tell the people about your beautiful work. What do you do?
So what I do, I'm a women's alignment coach, and I used to be a therapist. I've been helping women for over 10 years. And to me, what women's alignment coach really means is helping women come into coherence with their mind, body, heart, and spirit. We have to look at women's health and wellness and mental health, physical, spiritual health, relational health holistically. And so to me, women's alignment coach is really about helping women step into alignment so that they can feel truth, discern truth, and also step further and further into leadership and next levels of success in their life. So that's a little bit about like what that means. What I do, I lead a few groups. I do one-on-one work. I also do human design on the side. It integrates into all of my sessions. So yeah, there's just a lot of fun things that I explore with my clients because I have a rich history of modalities that I can really support people with. So
Yeah,
sometimes even just like labeling it women's alignment coach, I'm like, it doesn't really encompass all the things,
yeah.
but I hope we get the gist across.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, when you have 10 years of experience, both clinically and like, I mean, I feel like our work is it's so similar in so many ways because we work with the mind, body, and spirit. So having that 10 years of experience, like, yeah, there's so many different modalities that you work with. And I wanted to ask you, like, who are the people that you serve? Who are your people, Rochelle?
You know, my people are typically the highly independent woman. She's resilient, not always by choice. She's probably had some adversity in her life, but her resiliency has gotten to her to a level of leadership, entrepreneurship. She's usually in a service provider role of some sort, like a healer, a therapist, a
Mhm.
coach. But she can also be a hairdresser or a nurse. But
Yeah.
really her heart is to serve others. And ironically, sometimes that means she forgets about herself. And so I support her because a lot of that was my upbringing as well, is feeling this pressure to process alone by myself. No one really told me that. That just was my interpretation of what my experience was in childhood. And so I see a lot of women as internal processors as well, where they kind of isolate themselves before asking for what they need. And a lot of businesswomen as well think I need to do. And then they come to me and realize I need to be, and learn
Yeah.
about my femininity and learn about my inner child and learn about my nervous system and learn about kind of the patterns that aren't serving me anymore. And usually it's just like, minor behavioral tweaks at the end of the day. It's awarenesses about the trauma blocks that are stopping us from stepping into those next levels of success, but it's also just about simply learning, like, how can I change that behavior? And with my one-on-one clients, I really believe in coherence, and co-regulation. So a lot of my support is also very tangible and hands-on. When someone's like learning something new, I got their back. Like, we
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
about it, we process it through the body instead of just the mind. We do both because that's really how we integrate information and create lasting change. But then they have me in their back pocket on the app called Telegram, where they can text and voice note me when they're, say, trying a new communication style with their boss, or trying a new way to show up with their partner, or about to launch something new in their business and their nervous system is freaking out. And so I kind of am there to talk them off the ledge, and really, again, I truly believe the power of like co-regulation and
Yeah.
in the moment processing, which I couldn't do when I was just a therapist, which is what I love doing, supporting my clients now, because that's where we can make that like lasting change really,
Hmm.
really stick.
Yeah, I totally agree because I mean, I feel like now in the online space, there's a lot of push of being that independent woman who grinds and, has to do it all on her own. Like she's praised for that, right?
Mhm.
And there is so much potency in co-regulation and having a beautiful support system with really safe people and people like yourself who are like also trained professionals but also have lived experience, which brings me to my next question. You mentioned a lot about how there's trauma blocks within a lot of the clients that you see, but I really, really would love you to share about the trauma blocks you experience, like on your business, on your journey as an entrepreneur, but just also as a human being. Like tell us about your story, about your upbringing, and how it's like impacted your relationships and your business. Because I feel like all of those things are so interrelated.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can imagine like you do this work because maybe, well, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but um, did you have anybody to co-regulate with?
Well,
That was like a loaded question, sorry, but like, yeah, it was
that's
like
okay.
multi-layered.
Um, I mean, I could tell my whole life story in this entire podcast, so I'll do my best to keep it abbreviated, but um my default response is a freeze response or a fawn response. And so for those who are listening who don't really know, my lesson in life is to not disconnect from my body and to express using my voice. That's the opposite of the freeze response. And the fawn response is also the tendency to make sure other people are taken care of. And so again, it's more so about my lesson is to learn to express myself and my needs and use my voice. And I agree with you that highly independent woman is very praised in society now. And I don't think she's wrong or bad, but learning how to cooperate in collaboration and community is, I think, the key to women's success in general. And I had to truly come to terms with that, not from a place of, I didn't carry wounding that some women have with other women and like pain points with their mom or their sister or being bullied by friends. But I carry that point as in like, I don't want to be a bother. I don't want to be the friend that asks too much. I'll just
Mm,
figure it out myself.
yeah.
And that ran really deep because for me in my story, I'm the oldest child, so a lot of oldest childs have this very independent part of self because we're the helper, we're the supporter,
You're
we're
the
the
second
second
parent.
parent, exactly, second, third
Yeah.
parent. So here we are. I'm also the oldest grandchild on both sides of the family,
Oh
so
my
it's like
goodness, yeah.
added. I'm a 6'2" in human design, which also means I'm very much meant to be the leader and the role model. So a lot of aspects of my life put me in this place of being a strong, independent woman. I was also raised by a very independent mother. But what happened to me when I was 2 years old, so prior to two, at least from what I've been told anyways, because I don't cognitively remember, but from what I was told is I was held all the time. My needs were met before I even started crying. Like my mom used to take me to the movie theater. Like that's how calm of a baby I was.
Yeah.
And carried everywhere and, fed on a schedule, like very attentive. And then when I was two, my sister was born with special needs. She was very handicapped, nonverbal, had like heart and brain issues. And it just kind of derailed everything in our entire family. It was unexpected. No one knew that this was happening. And they didn't even actually know how long she would survive. When she was born, they were like, I don't know, maybe a couple days, maybe a couple hours. And she
Wow.
ended up living for 14 years. And how that shaped my life it really changed so much of my life for the better, but also really challenged me um, to do a lot of my own healing work too. So when my sister came into the picture, suddenly Rachele was not fully neglected, but definitely, um, we can't meet your needs right now because your sister might die. We can't meet your
Yeah.
needs. I mean, that was never explicitly said that way to me, but that's the
No.
severity of it. It wasn't just like
Yeah.
another sibling was born and you got to learn patience and wait your turn. It was extreme. So my nervous system had a really extreme stress response to when someone said, I'm busy, not right now, or please don't bother me. I've got a lot on my plate. And I would make that mean like something really scary is going to happen, like someone could die or like
Literally,
something
yeah.
really big could
Yeah.
happen. because that was just the imprint on my body. Sometimes we had to jump, like if she needed to go to the hospital,
Mm-hmm.
forget piano lessons, we're going to the hospital. So,
Yeah.
a lot of my life was around accommodating her special needs.
Yeah.
And then my brother, who is only 2.5 years younger than me, so that's how close we were in siblings, he was born into the stress. So when he was really little, he was more assertive with his needs than I ever was. So then again, I became the responsible, mature big sister, try to take care of everyone, don't be a bother to mom or dad, they're already stressed out
Mm-hmm.
very, 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 very quickly. And that really translated into me being the mom friend for everyone, me being the therapist for everyone, me
Mm.
being constantly told, "Oh, you're wise beyond your years," and
Yeah.
me not really allowing myself to rebel or have fun or any of that stuff. And so I just kind of fell in line with what I should do because that's just what you do. And I
Yeah.
used to secretly sort of have an internal dialogue of the way that I see the world, but I never really verbalized that out loud because, again, didn't want to ruffle any feathers, right? That's the fawn
Mm-hmm.
response talking, and also mixed with the freeze response.
Yeah.
And so I got married quite young because I grew up quite conservative Christian. And again, he checked all the boxes, he made sense. And so this was the thing that you do. If you want to move in together, you get married. That's just
Yeah.
the way things go. And we got married young, and like lo and behold, I became his mother, his maid, his butler, his everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I was burnt out, and I didn't really understand what was going on or why it wasn't working because we made sense on paper
Yeah.
and we made sense on so many levels. And then fast forward basically 8 years of marriage and 10 years together. And he just came home one day and told me that he had cheated. And I was like completely blindsided by
Oh,
it, like
wow.
completely blindsided by it.
Yeah.
And my wake up call was after my panic attack in the bathroom when he told me that.
Mm-hmm.
I came out and he was sitting on the couch and, very in a shame spiral. And my response to him was, I can't believe you were hurting so much and you couldn't tell me.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, when I think about that, like in the reality, I was still concerned about how he
How?
couldn't feel safe to talk to me. And I was
Yeah.
hurt that he didn't feel safe to share with me that he was unhappy. Instead of going like, Rochelle, like, what about how you felt in this marriage? Like, what about how
Yeah.
you are feeling now? What about like what's going on for you? Like, I was like desperate to try to understand his choices and why he would
Mm-hmm.
make those, and also like how he didn't feel like he could talk to me about stuff. And I was like, everyone talks to me, and my own partner couldn't talk to me. And I was like offended in a way,
Yeah.
realizing like I was like, Rochelle, you have the right to be pissed off right now.
Yeah.
But I was just so disconnected from that part of myself. I never really got angry growing up. I never really even got angry through the divorce process, other than I got a sense of resiliency about a couple weeks in when I realized therapy was not supportive for either one of us because he was already checked out and
Yeah.
not into it at all. And so, yeah, it really kind of shifted things for the two of us very quickly because it came to light that he had a lot of narcissistic tendencies and I had to
Mm.
heal a lot of that. So at that time, I was doing therapy like 2, 3 times a week because I was just like, I'm not going to repeat these same patterns.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do this over again. I'm here to learn and grow. And
Good
that
for
was a turning
you.
point for me to go back to school and consider like what I wanted to do with my life once I kind of let that go. But on top of everything, in Canada, it takes time for divorces to finalize at about two
Mm-hmm.
years, give or take, if you're doing mediation, at least at that time. Our divorce was finalized in the month of April towards the end, and then in the very beginning of June, I found out that him and his girlfriend had suddenly passed away, and I was just like,
Oh my gosh.
like again, all over, like grief and confusion and
Yeah.
frustration, not knowing where I fit, not knowing what I was allowed to do. I was hurt that I wasn't informed
Mm-hmm.
personally after being with someone for 10 years,
Oh
like
yeah, of course.
so many levels of trauma there as well. And it just like shook me. And then it was that combined with a car accident shortly after that I was like, I can't do the job that I was doing, and it's time to step into my life purpose to be like a helper, a healer, a supporter person actually
Yeah.
from this place of now witnessing my therapist and her lifestyle and how she was able to help me understand what self-care was. I didn't even know what self-care was
Yeah.
when I
Because they
like
don't
that's
teach
how
that to us.
no, exactly. I had no hot clue.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was my big kind of turning point, and then now here we are, and there's lots of stuff in between that, but yeah.
Wow. Wow, Rochelle, thank you so much for sharing that. Like there was so many I have so many questions for you now. But the main theme that comes up is like grief in so many different ways. Like grief of like having to grieve your parents that you expected them to be, right? And
Hmm.
that you kind of couldn't really have, right? Grief around like looking at your brother and feeling like, oh my goodness, like I really want those quality and traits, but I feel like I can't. So like grieving parts of yourself that, you know, you didn't embody yet in that moment. Grief with your divorce, grief with like legit like death grief, like that is a whirlwind of grief, you know? And
Yep.
I know that you went through a lot of therapy. And like, by the way, so proud of you because like what you said just was just like so activating where you're just like, I'm not fucking repeating this shit. Like, fuck that. I am
No.
not repeating this. And it takes a very and I mean, I don't know how you feel about this word. Some people don't like it, but like it takes a very resilient person
Yep.
to change, like turn their life around and unlearn so many belief systems and
Hmm.
thought patterns, and even like it's just a whole different way of existing, you know. So I would love for you to just talk a little bit more about how that embodiment process went for you, especially because you said you were married for like what was it, 8 to 10 years or something, and
Together for 10, married for
yeah,
8. Yeah.
okay, yeah. So together for 10 years plus that time from your childhood, so that, like that you never got angry and experienced so much of different forms of grief,
Hmm.
and then how did you embody who you are today? Like like and I'm sure like that's like a a heavy question too. It's a huge question, but I'm so intrigued. It's you have a very unique story, by the way. To say
Thank
that.
you. Yeah,
Yeah, you
yeah.
have a very
It's
unique
it's
story.
it's shocking to a lot of people when they hear it.
Mm.
And it's my normal. Like a lot of people
Mhm.
used to project onto me too, like what was normal for my upbringing as a child. And I realized like I played by myself a lot as a kid, and that didn't mean it was bad or wrong. Like, but
Yeah.
so many people wanted to say, oh, poor Rochelle. And I left thinking a lot of that, like feeling sorry for myself for a while
Mm.
in the process of grief, because that's also part of it is you need to kind of give voice to those parts of self.
Oh,
But
100%. Yeah.
when I was going through the divorce process, there was a moment and a turning point where someone had asked me, like, how are you able to handle yourself with so much grace? And like, how are you able to handle yourself, like carry yourself with such, I don't think she used the word resiliency, but maybe she had said strength or something. And I
Mm.
had said to her, I was like, I just woke up one day and realized that he's not in my life anymore. So he doesn't have power over me anymore, which means I can take
Mhm.
my power back. And
Yeah.
he's not in control of
Yeah.
how I feel. And when I'm bitter and resentful and angry towards him, like, what is the point? There is no point
Yeah.
in letting him ruin my day, my life, my week, whatever, because he doesn't have a say anymore. And that was sort of a liberating moment in the divorce process.
Yeah.
Um, Still didn't get to the anger though, but um, I in therapy and coaching school, we had to do something called a therapeutic release session,
Mhm.
which was enacting your biggest traumas. And oftentimes people would punch punching bags and like scream at their parents or,
Mhm.
say all the things they wish they had said. And I, again, was still so disconnected from my anger that I went to sadness. I read a letter
Mm,
to all my family members saying the real me and who the real me was because
yeah.
I felt like I used to hide a lot of myself with my family and loved ones. I felt like I no one really knew me. Um, and that's part of the fact that I didn't really express all those parts of self because again, don't want to be a bother, want to be the good girl, good
Don't want to
daughter.
be
Like,
too much. Yeah.
yes, which actually was in turn, I don't want to deal with the conflict. I don't think I can
Yeah.
handle the repercussions of that. And so I'd rather just internally be out of integrity than externally have to deal with your feelings about my opinion.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's really what that was. And so even in that moment, I didn't go to anger at all in school. And it wasn't until someone triggered something somatic in me. An ex of mine, he'd cuddled me all night long. We didn't really sleep. We just like cuddled. He held
Yeah.
me all night long. And there was a moment when he left, like the next day. And again, nothing sexual happened. It was like completely
Yeah.
just being held. And very shortly after that, he started ghosting me.
Mm,
And that little toddler in me that was 2 years old was like, what are you doing? You're
yeah.
abandoning me. Like, after I've been held for so
Yeah.
long, you're disappearing. And I was like, oh. And I realized this in a moment of femininity work. I'd been on my journey of femininity, and so I had understood a little bit more about the importance of anger and rage and letting my
Mm-hmm.
feelings out. And I had started practicing a bit more of that before this happened. But when this happened, it fueled in me like a sacred, severe rage that I was
Yeah.
just like, something deep is triggered, and I couldn't make sense of it. So I went to a somatic therapist, and she was doing hands-on touch with me, and she had
Mm-hmm.
her hands, I think they were like on my kidneys or something, and without my consent, she took them away. And I burst out crying. And
Oh
I
my
was
God.
like, "Oh, that's what it was."
Yeah.
Because I was held all up until 2 years old and then nothing. And
Mm,
so the part of me that was crying was like this 2-year-old that she didn't even have words yet to say like, where's my mom? Where's my dad?
yeah.
Who's
For
holding me?
sure.
Like, grandma and grandpa are fine, or like babysitter's fine, but it's not my
Yeah.
parents. And so this rage just like needed to be let out. And I was so thankful for him actually triggering that in me because it made me realize how important honoring my inner child was in the healing process of so many aspects of what I do
Right.
now and so many aspects of like whenever we're triggered as humans, it's usually from something from childhood. And
100%. Yeah.
we also don't need to have answers in our mind for why. It can
Mm,
just be like my body's feeling something and I need to move it through my body.
yeah.
And that's really what I've learned over the last few years in this embodiment journey is it doesn't need to make sense. It doesn't even need to have words.
Mm-hmm.
It just, if you feel it, it's important because you're important and your inner child didn't always have words either. And so really honoring and recognizing like she matters, her feelings matter, and even if it seems irrational, like let yourself have a temper tantrum every once in a
Yeah.
while. That's really
For
how I
sure.
get out of those freeze states. Is like I just hit a wall and I'm like, "Ugh, I'm frustrated with myself for being in a freeze state." So then I
Yeah.
throw my temper tantrum and shake it off and move my body and kind of go through a cycle of getting to the other side of an emotion, which again was never taught how to feel a feeling fully and then
Mm-hmm.
come out the other side. And I now that's one of the biggest things that is transformational in my world and so many of my clients' world as well is understanding like how to process feelings.
Yeah. Such a big thing because, like, a lot of people don't know how to, like, fully complete an emotion, right?
Hmm.
Like, and again, like that, a lot of the times, like you said, like that relates, it's deeply rooted in childhood, whether people are conscious of it or not, right?
Yeah.
Like, because some people actually don't, like, I mean, you had a background of what you were kind of told about what was happening for you at those ages, and some people don't, right? So it can not make any sense. But I love what you said around, like, even if it's illogical, just allow yourself. And it reminds me, like, I was talking to my therapist, and I had, like, I was upset with myself that I had a need. And I was like, why the fuck do I feel like this? Why can't I just be like this independent, like super secure all the time woman, you know? And she's like, or what if you just let yourself be human and just like stop putting limitations on your needs and just let it be okay because it's obviously coming up for a certain reason.
Yeah.
And that
Exactly.
and it's very similar to what you said, like that changed the trajectory of like how I asked for my needs to be met because I was like, oh, you know, I gotta I gotta kind of like shelter my needs a little bit because like don't want to be too much, you know, don't want to be too seen, don't want to
Hmm.
feel like, you know, everybody like a pressure, like exactly what you said, like a burden, you know.
Hmm.
And there's so much magic that happens within us when we can just soften and let ourselves have those needs like unapologetically, you know. And I feel
Yeah.
like that is a huge part of, you know, living out the divine feminine is softening, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And it goes into like, you know, the word illogical like comes up for me a lot too, where it's like our intuition is doesn't have logic and we still follow that. So, you
Hmm.
know, let's translate that to our needs too, right? Like if it doesn't
Yeah.
have, and of course, like, you know, we have to be discerning sometimes, but like, yeah, like we have to just let ourselves feel what we feel and be in the moment with ourselves. And again, like we might get the answer and then sometimes we don't, or maybe we get it like years later, you know. And just being okay with that because our mind, like when we're like completely up here all the time, it's just constantly wanting to make sense. It's constantly wanting certainty. It's constantly wanting to understand. And it's great to have that, but when we're like when we're constantly just like conceptualizing, like that leaves us in a loop.
Yeah.
It does not heal trauma. Like it like just
No.
understanding your trauma does not mean that you know how to heal your trauma, you know?
No. And
Yeah.
that's so important to understand too, because the thing that I always say is if the answer is in the mind, it's coming from the past. The
Mm,
only way you're gonna make new decisions and create new patterns and behaviors is when you listen and move it through the body.
yeah, exactly.
Because that's the only way that you're present in the moment is when you're listening to your body. Your brain is literally there to keep you alive.
Yeah.
That's alive and aware. Thank
Hmm.
you, brain, for keeping me alive and safe and aware. But
Yeah.
like then what about everything else moving forward,
Yeah.
right? So how can I understand that like understanding information is not the same as integrating, is not the same as
Mm,
embodying, is not the same as a new behavior. So
exactly.
many people, and this is part of the reason why I switched a bit of my practice up, is I was realizing that many people talk therapy alone, though valuable, wasn't getting results. It was just
Yeah.
bringing awarenesses and maybe, you know, diluting some of the processing and like
Yeah.
helping people maybe sometimes get to a bit of a baseline because suddenly their brain was like, oh, okay, I now know where this comes from. But then what happens
Mm.
is I know where this comes from. So now I'm going to make a big story about it and create an entire identity around it and then try to figure out
Mm,
how to then
yes.
get rid of it. And it's like, that's also not supportive either.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. I totally agree with the identity part. And like this is coming from like I'm a survivor of like big T traumas since I was a child. And like I've noticed this with some people that I've worked with where it's like there's just this identity around being traumatized and there's some comfort in it, you
Sure.
know?
Yeah. It
Like
validates things.
yeah, yeah.
Yep.
And like that and you know, like you said, like when you're too much in the mind, like we need a coherence of all of them, right? Like of like the like just like exactly what you do in your work is the mind, body, heart, and soul too, right? Because like we can't have one without the other. We need it, it's all encompassing to
Mm-hmm.
proper healing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just mindset work, it's not just talking about it, because you're right, like it does bring people to just like a baseline. And people think like having self-awareness is so great and I love it. I love it so much, but it really can only do so much. You can
Mm-hmm.
know your flaws and it's just like, okay, well, what's the integration process?
Yeah,
How are you applying, and like, and how are you showing up in those times where it's probably really easy to fall back into an old pattern,
exactly.
you
Exactly.
know? Like there's I always tell my clients this is that you need to have a certain amount of like self-compassion and self-discipline and self-accountability. Because
Mm-hmm.
before, I noticed too, like when from what we're taught in it, like when you're trained as a therapist to have compassion, yeah, of course, we need that. But I feel like sometimes in mainstream therapy, it's like only that. And to be honest with you, sometimes our clients need a little bit of not, I don't want to say tough love, but they need to be held accountable for their healing.
Yeah.
Like your trauma is not an excuse. It's not an excuse for you, and it's not an excuse for the people who have hurt you either, right? Because we're so quick to say like, their trauma is not an excuse, and I really want to bring it back to the self too, and be like, well, are you excused from that? Right?
I know
Like,
it's such a like slippery, sneaky
yeah.
conversation because, I think that this is what I speak to a lot too, and I think the feminine journey needs to understand this as well. There's a point in the healing process where you need to lean in to being a victim. Let yourself
100%.
lean
Yeah.
into it. Like
Yeah.
anyone with any point of trauma,
Yeah.
like
You can't bypass it.
exactly. Like,
Yeah.
let yourself be the damsel in distress. Let yourself want to
Yeah.
be saved. Let yourself express those desires. Like, but the key is not staying there.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
many people go like, well, this happened to me and this is why I behave this way. Great. Good to know. And what are you doing about it so that it won't derail your life when triggers happen? What are you doing about
Yeah.
it so that you will actually feel, and this is my unsexy word, but the key to empowerment is self-responsibility.
Yeah.
And a lot of women, because again, I don't know if I've ever met a woman in my life who hasn't dealt with some form of unwanted touch or sexual approach
Yeah.
or assault, abuse, bullying, groping, shaming,
Yeah.
commented on her appearance, her words, her voice, her whatever. And all these things shut us down further and further and further. And we don't realize how much pent up emotions that we are holding on to. And so there's a time that it's really necessary to give words and emotion to that stuck energy. And then there's a time when it can become overly identified with and
Yeah.
become, I hate the patriarchy and I hate all men and
Yeah.
everything is evil and everything is against me and I'm now
Yeah.
like a woman for women, but really you're a woman against. And it's like the pressure to have power over when we're traumatized is like almost like the pendulum swing, like the flip
Yeah.
side of she played the like poor me for a little while, which is necessary, and then she went to the other flip side of like I'm
Yeah.
powerful and I don't need anyone and
Yeah.
I
And men
hate
are
everyone that isn't on
shit.
my side
Yeah.
and it becomes very like aggressive in the other way. And the integration is realizing it's not about having power over the circumstances that happen to you. It's about realizing you've always held the power. What happened to you is likely not your fault. You
Yeah.
didn't ask for those things to happen to you, especially if it happened in childhood or
Yeah. Yeah.
under the influence or something. Like you're not aware or asking for these things,
Yeah.
so it's not your fault. And realizing that does not also mean that it helps you to blame others either, because again, all that does is externalize your experience. So that dance of like you know, I see this online. It's like, are you shaming the victim for being a victim? It's like, no,
Yeah.
I'm inviting her and evoking her to step into her power
Exactly.
from
Yeah.
a self-responsible place, from an aligned place, not from you need to pander to my trauma and everyone around me should be walking on eggshells so that they don't trigger
Mm-hmm.
my trauma. And how dare you not say this and this and this, or how dare you say all of this to me
Yeah.
because of my story?
Yeah.
And so much of the world right now is living in that consciousness of like, tiptoe around everyone and I don't want to offend anyone and then no
Yeah.
one's being themselves and everyone's scared
Yeah.
of everyone and then it's like making us even more paranoid to be ourselves and even more paranoid to be
Yeah.
authentic and even more paranoid to even express those parts of our femininity that might be seen as overly sensual or weird
Mm-hmm.
or quirky or childlike, right?
Yeah.
Because again, judgment might
Yeah.
happen.
And like, and I agree with you completely because and when we are not able to fully express ourselves because of the fear of judgment of other people, it's just creating so many energy blocks within our body to receive, to
Mm-hmm.
be held. And people are wondering like, okay, like why is my life going the way that it is? And I mean, it's so multi-layered, obviously, but I mean, I love the energy work side,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm always just like, okay, well, there must be a block somewhere, and
Yeah.
it's related to that. And so, like, if people are continuing to show up in paranoia and like walking on eggshells, like you said, right? Like those blocks are just going to keep getting bigger, thicker, you know, and it's going to perpetuate that trauma cycle because I mean, when you're in survival mode, which is exactly what it is, like there's a lot of people in survival mode right now,
Yeah.
um, you, it's really hard to heal in that. Like, I don't think you can, right?
Yeah. Being
And
aware of what that looks like too, I think is
mhm,
the challenge. And also there takes a level of humility to realize that people around you might be walking on eggshells
mhm,
or people are telling you things and you're not ready to hear it, but
yeah,
that's exactly what you need to hear in order to change.
mhm,
Um, and I think those are turning point moments for people where they can choose to go like, "Oh, I was unaware that my behavior from my past traumas was making you walk on eggshells.
mhm,
That is not my intention."
yeah,
And it's really the responsibility of the person who gets triggered to look at their trigger. It's not
oh
particularly,
yeah,
unless the person who's being is being cruel and mean intentionally,
mhm,
most of the time people do not trigger people on purpose.
yeah,
Most of the time people are innocently saying something in a tone of voice or
mhm,
innocently expressing some thought, idea, or opinion and not really concerned about if that will offend someone because again, let's be real, you can be the most people-pleasing person. You're pleasing others because you're still in your own head and your own perception
mhm,
of what's important to you. Everyone is in their own story, in their own
yeah,
way. And when we realize that, like, it takes the pressure off. Like, it's not all about me. They're not always trying to hurt
yeah,
me. It's not just me. But also then take that a step further. What about that situation offended me or hurt me or triggered me? And how can I
yeah,
then build my capacity for tolerance? Because again,
yeah,
tolerance is not I'll take it and lean back and whatever, do whatever you want to me. Tolerance is how can I be in a room with people and disagree with them and still have a discussion and still operate heart to heart and
yeah,
still be with love
yeah,
and also agree to disagree. Like that's
yeah, for
totally
sure.
normal.
And like yeah, like I think it goes both ways. Like I think like there are people for sure who are not trying to trigger people intentionally.
Hmm.
And then I think also too, maybe based on my experiences, that there's people who see someone who's vulnerable and get a rise sometimes out of it too,
Yep.
But you finish that
And
off
that's the
really
intentionally cruel person that I'm describing.
exactly. Yeah.
The vulnerable person in those moments, again, when that happens, I would invite the vulnerable person to recognize the signs of them being manipulated or gaslit or
Yeah.
whatever, because
Yeah.
that's what I had to do too. I was bulldozed over with my ex, And
Yeah.
I had to go, my biggest journey in my life has advocating for myself and expressing myself and sharing
Yeah.
what's happening for me. So saying no to the bully and saying I'm not okay
Yeah.
with that
Yeah.
and being okay not being loved or liked by everyone and being
Yeah.
okay ruffling feathers with that person and also recognizing like it's safe for me to say no now as an adult. Like
Yeah.
when we were
Exactly.
children, there often was no escape if you didn't have a safe adult there to help you
Mm-hmm.
through that scary moment where you couldn't
Yeah.
say no. But
Yeah.
now as an adult, like for the most part, and I'm generalizing here, but for the most part,
Mm-hmm.
if someone's being an asshole to you, you can say no, or you can delete the comment, or you can walk out of the room,
Yeah.
or you can just say, you know what, this isn't the type of conversation I like having, and
Yeah.
peace.
Yeah.
Like,
Not available for this, right?
yeah, yeah,
But and you finished it off really really nicely a moment ago where you shared like you can have loving heart to heart conversations with people and have different views and disagree with people, and it doesn't mean that people are against you. It's just people have different experiences and different belief systems, and that gets to be okay too, right? Like we're
exactly.
we're not all meant to think the same way, and we're not all meant to be the same way, right? And also too, like having those conversations from a heart-centered space and being open-minded and open-hearted to receiving and even providing information can change your perspective on belief systems as well too. And that's for the person who is really tapped into themselves and not
Yeah,
just self-aware, but is like willing to receive feedback around, okay, like how can I show up better, you
yeah.
know, instead of
And
taking it
that's,
super personally and getting defensive, right?
to me, that's the mark of a true leader and
Yeah.
also the mark of an embodied feminine.
Yeah.
Because if you are confident and secure in who you are, you can be okay with, again, being like, cool, that's what you think. It's not what I think, but that's okay. Or
Yeah.
also, and this is the other thing that is not taught in therapy school, but also realizing that, like, someone's first session in therapy, you can learn something from your client just because you went to school for the thing doesn't mean someone new can't teach you something new.
Yeah.
So, also, like, realizing, like,
Yeah.
oh, thank you for challenging my beliefs on this concept. I'll
Yeah.
think about that. Like, and actually saying that and
Yeah.
realizing again, to me, that's also the mark of a really strong leader is realizing that we don't know everything. And the point
That's
is
the
ever
thing.
learning and
Yeah.
ever growing. And I can learn things from different people on my path, and I don't have to learn it from a guru or someone that I
Mm-hmm.
think
Yeah.
is at a certain level of success or growth or awareness. I can learn it from, I don't know, the barista. Like
Yeah.
you never know. And I think that's why like so much of clearing the energy blocks, which let's just call it the emotional blocks and let's just
Mm-hmm.
call it the trauma blocks,
Yeah.
right? When we clear and make space for that, we can be more in our hearts because again, our
Yeah.
brain's not looking at the world going, who's going to hurt me? Who's going to harm me?
Mm-hmm.
You're then operating going like, wow, I'm curious about life around me. Oh, cool. And you almost like are flirting with life, which to me is
Yeah.
also that feminine essence, which is why I think that feminine is so intrinsically connected to the inner child and intrinsically connected to, our capacity to be in our hearts and in our bodies. And then when you're like just like present, that's how you
Mm.
really truly know that a lot of the stuff that's happened in your past isn't controlling your life anymore. It's part of the narrative
Yeah.
shaped who you are, but it's not in charge of who you're becoming.
Yeah. I completely agree. And when you get to that point, it is the most like it's such a calm feeling. But that point, I remember when this happened to me. That's sorry, I'm just like having a flashback.
Yeah, sure. I want to hear.
Yeah, I remember when this was happening to me. I had like gone out on a date, and I was like, this guy kissed me, and literally, I was so present. I was not
Mm,
my my brain was not running. I was just like present with him. And a lot of that had to do because like well, the work I did on myself, but too like
Yeah.
when it's with the right like when it's with a safe person,
Mm-hmm.
um your body just like it just naturally softens, you know?
Exactly. Exactly.
But yeah, I remember that moment where I was just like it's so funny. I'm like kissing him and I'm like, shit, I'm not thinking about anything. And I'm like, okay, now I am. But I was like, wow, like I am just so present and like dialed into this moment. And it was one of the most beautiful experiences that I could ever have,
Yeah.
honestly. Because
Yeah.
that had never happened to me before, right? Like I
Mm-hmm.
was always in my head. Like I have past sexual violence trauma, and always in my head, especially in intimacy, like
Mm-hmm.
just like constantly hyper vigilant or thinking of past experiences. And when that moment happened, I was like, "What the fuck is happening?" I was like, "This is absolutely blissful," you know.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's a beautiful place to be, you know.
Yeah.
And that's uh that's what happens when you work with people like us, right? Rochelle, please tell everybody about your offerings that you have before we close up.
Oh my gosh. I've got a few things happening right now. I'll start by sharing that I do one-on-one packages with clients. I typically like to do long-term packages because
Yeah.
as much as people don't like to hear it, your nervous system doesn't move as fast as your brain likes to think it does. And so most women need slowing down. And this is how we make integrated change is pacing ourselves and really listening to the body, and that means moving a bit slower. So
Yeah.
my preference is
Agree.
working in 1 year packages with one-on-one clients, but I do have options to do shorter packages as well. And then in addition to that, I'm also in the midst of launching, and by the time this is aired, it probably will have launched, my mentorship community called She for We, and it's
Ah.
all for healers, coaches, therapists, light workers, service providers, who want to take the time to receive for themselves. So it's very much guided mentorship from me, mixed with tools to help them and their nervous system expand to those next levels of success. So it's not your traditional business coaching kind of vibe. It's
Yeah.
actually more about what's going on underneath the block as opposed to strategy and solution
Yeah.
oriented. It's about embodiment. It's about having those deeper discussions about maybe why your hormones are impacting how you can actually participate with your clients, or it's going to be exploring things like your human design and how that impacts how you show up in your business and so much more. Embodiment, a lot of embodiment practices, because as we know, if you are a service provider, you are giving of yourself so much. And so this is my wish that I had when I was in the earlier days of my business, but
Yeah.
really also at any point in time, I'm doing this group for myself too, because
Yeah.
we all are supporters who need support too. And to be seen
Agreed.
by other women who
Yeah.
get it, and to also learn new skills and be in a room with other people who are on the same wavelength as you, who are kind of having some of those challenges. I love leaving space also for like debriefing how to support certain
Mm.
clients and case
Yeah.
studies. I love leaving space for like, I'm about to launch something and I'm feeling nervous. Like, what do I do? How do I support
Yeah.
myself? I have tons of somatic strategies that I will teach my clients. And I think a big one that, because this is you and your practice and your audience, I'll say a big one that I will be exploring is just signs of trauma and
Mm.
how that can stop people from growth. And so knowing those signs and having
Yeah.
people in their tool belt to refer to who are skilled at trauma, and really being able to have that kind of support system around you as a coach or a RMT or a hairdresser,
Mm.
whatever it is, to know like, oh, I like hit a place where we need to go into trauma, and that's why strategy is not always working. That's
Yeah.
why they're ready to hear the solution yet. So there's a lot of kind of stuff I'll be curating based on the group's needs as well. That's very much how I facilitate is collaborative approach to
Mm.
facilitation. And I wanted to feel a bit different than what's been done before. like a mix of essentially like, again, guidance and supervision and mentorship, but also um, a no pressure place to just receive. Like if you're a
Yeah.
community oriented person, engage in the community, but there's no pressure to have
Yeah.
to do
Yeah.
all these things. We're already giving so much for ourselves. So this
Yeah.
isn't a space where you have to give to others if you're not feeling like you have the capacity for that. This is
Yeah.
your space to just simply receive. And you have your people in your community if you want to learn more from them or connect with them in the group. So that's one that I'm really excited about. And then in addition, I have a mastermind community called the Round Table, which is for leaders in their field, experts in their field. And we are sitting at a round table making waves and changing this planet.
Oh,
It
I
can be
get
very
that.
lonely to be a leader.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh my gosh, yeah.
and if you're the trailblazer and you're the one doing life differently and you're innovating and creating, you need other people to be in the room with you who get that too.
Hmm.
And you understand the value of being in the room with other innovators. And that's really what the round table is about. It's a true mastermind. So we'll be co-creating and doing a ton of collaboration because to me, um, the word mastermind and group coaching has very much been intermingled, and that's
Mm.
really not my jam. I'm
Yeah.
here for women in community and connection, and how can we create a ripple effect when we all work together. And I want to be in the room with women who are making waves, and so I decided to create that room and
Yes.
that table because that's the leader that I am. And so I truly want women to come together and realize how much change they can make when they are with the right people. And so this is for, again, it's an application only process. We'll be starting in October, so I'm not 100% sure when this is airing, but if this piques your interest, message me if we've already launched, because there'll be different points and times when people can join. But my vision is doing a lot of like wise woman circles where people can come and participate in that. Um, and that's all I'll share for now because it's kind of a secret club that I'm like kind of curating with the certain people, which I'm very, very excited
Yeah.
about for that too, because yeah, I just feel really called to bring women together in groups. There is something really healing about being seen and heard and also knowing you're not alone in it. That's really been my life story, is that
Yeah.
understanding I don't have to do it all by myself and I don't need to do it all alone. And women are not meant to be islands. We are here to be in community. Since the dawn of
Yeah.
time, we bled together, we made food together, we raised children
Yeah.
together, and suddenly now in today's society, it's like, can I bother my friend if I'm going through something? Like,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
This is so opposite of how our nature really is meant to be. We're very
Yeah.
relational in our feminine, so more of that.
Wow. I
And
love
I do
all of
human
that.
design readings as well, by the way, if
Oh,
anyone's
yes,
curious.
yes, yes.
We didn't dive too much into that today, but human
Next
design is a game
time.
changer if you want to understand yourself.
Yeah. No, I would love to have you on to just specifically talk about that.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. This was so insightful, and honestly, like just hearing your story, it's like really imprinted my heart. And just thank you for being so vulnerable and for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom and your love with all of us. And where can people find you on your socials? I'm going to leave it in the show notes.
Sure, yeah. Women's alignment coach. Everything is
Oh,
women's alignment coach, all one
amazing.
word. Yeah. And then yeah, in the show notes, I'm sure Sam will have my website and stuff, and you can
Yes.
there. And yeah, it's all on Women's Alignment Coach. I spend most of my time on Instagram. So
Yeah.
if people want to chat with me, that's the best place to find me is Instagram.
Yeah, her page is popping, guys. Like, especially her stories.
Aw, yeah,
Yeah.
I give so much juice in my stories,
You
and I
do,
realize like
yeah.
maybe I should be putting this in posts and as well. But
Yeah.
that's kind of how I use the reel or the post of this as a spark, and then I always elaborate it in my stories.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this, check out my stories because
Yeah,
that's
go to her
where the juice
stories. It's
come.
literally popping always, every day.
Thank you, Sam.
Rochelle, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was such an honor to have you, and we'll have you on again to talk about human design at
Yeah,
another date and
I'd love
time.
to.
But
I'd
yeah,
love
thank
to.
you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. It means so much to me that we got to spend time together today. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at safehavensanctuary_. And if this episode resonated with you, it would mean the absolute world to me if you would share it with someone who you think it might resonate with as well. Or better yet, you could take a screenshot of this episode and share it to your story, tag me in it, just so we can bring more awareness to the podcast, and this will help the podcast to grow as well too. I appreciate all your support. I appreciate you listening, and I love you. Thank you for being here with me. Your presence, your time, your heart, your soul is so deeply valued here. I'll see you on the next episode.